Without further ado, please welcome Matt Roberts.
Good afternoon. Welcome those in the room, welcome those on the web. I'm going to talk a bit about sustainability. We've heard sustainability mentioned several times today, and where does it fit? And my particular interest here is where does it fit into the social bit fit into the sustainability, and very much that third pillar. Start off with Sustainability 101. Most of you will know this, but just in case there's one or two in the room who don't. Sustainability has three pillars. The first of those pillars, can somebody advance the slide for me, please? Is environment. And environment's kind of a well-developed pillar. We've been doing this for a very long time. We've got lots of drivers, lots of policy frameworks, lots of metrics, lots of things we can count, lots of things we know about. We've got EMS, we've got 14,001, we've got lots and lots of European legislation around biodiversity, protected species, protected habitats, protected landscapes. So the environment pillar is very, very substantial. It's very well understood, and most people wouldn't go about their daily lives in business, in the civil society sector, or in government without considering environment. It's quite a sensible thing, water, waste, biodiversity, etc. We come on to the next pillar. We might need to advance the slide manually. We get to the economic pillar. And the economic pillar is a little bit more ill-defined, slightly less mature, but in the last 5 or 6 years, in the sort of C-suites and the corporate boardrooms around the world, there's been a bit of a moment. Our good friend from The Simpsons has cropped up, and people have realised that if you don't buy things, you don't spend money on them. If you don't create waste, it doesn't cost you money to get rid of. And the nice thing about all of the economic stuff is that there's pretty much nothing between making that decision and the bottom line. If you don't buy energy, you don't spend money on it. If you don't buy water, you don't buy land, you don't create waste. We move forward. And it was it's taken a while, but that sort of has come home, and the business case is now quite an established part of of the sustainability argument, and we don't really have to worry about that. So we get to the sort of the social pillar, eventually, possibly, if we could just advance that the slide. There we go. We get to the social pillar, and that's what we're really kind of thinking about today and what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand where does this social pillar get the maturity that it needs in order to move forward. How do we create social value? What is social value? We all understand the value proposition for our customers. We do something that creates value that enables us to generate some revenue from it. We need to understand what the analogue for the pound in the economic argument and in the environmental argument is for the social argument. And that's quite a difficult thing to do. So why now? Why now is the social pillar coming to maturity? We're seeing a migration from concepts around ownership, possession, and individual sovereignty to ideas about access to, use of, collaboration with, and this marvellous thing that's called the wisdom of the crowd. And you are the crowd, and you are wise today, and we hope that maybe you'll be a little bit wiser, I'll be a little bit wiser, we'll all be a little bit wiser at the end of this. So what's the evidence for all this? Here we go. We've heard mention of the Occupy movement already, that's social action. We've seen and we've heard about the Arab Spring, that's social action. We've got Kickstarter. Anybody contributed to Kickstarter? I'm a man wearing a Pebble watch funded by Kickstarter. We've got YouTube stars, what we whizzed past. Anybody who's got a teenage daughter will know all about the Vamps. They started on YouTube. It's a complete industry. We've got Airbnb, which is a bit of a celebrated kind of success story. And we've got the granddaddy of all collaborative sharing, which is iTunes, kind of rapidly being moved on by Spotify. We saw the Icelandic constitution wandering through there. That was a crowd-funded or crowd-sourced 900 people selected across Iceland to rewrite their constitution. Having been instrumental in that financial bubble, they then needed to start again. And so they started with a crowdsourced model. And if anybody doubts whether or not this sort of populist social action has any kind of traction, some of you may be aware of there was a thing called Davos that finished on Saturday. This is the Financial Times introductory article on last Wednesday, talking about how popularism and that social driver is really having a big impact on the global elite at Davos. They can no longer ignore it. These articles all start with, actually, we can't walk away from this. We have to take it seriously. Otherwise, it's going to get worse. This is clicker wars. So, for me, there are 3 T's in the elements of this social pillar that's beginning to come together. There's transparency. Transparency is quite scary, as some of those clips will have just shown us. And people are very uncomfortable with transparency, but it's a huge and advantageous thing for us to have. We can't actually make social value real. We can't find some of the answers without transparency, but transparency means we are going to be accountable. And that's quite uncomfortable for a lot of people. The next T is technology. And technology has a dark side, illustrated by these 3 characters: Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and Bradley Mannings. But they, along with some transparency, have enabled us to discover a great deal more about what's going on in the world. And technology is enabling us to find out stuff about where things go, to track metrics. Open source data is incredibly important. So the second T is technology, and all of these T's have this kind of bipolar characteristic to them. And the last one is trust. We have to trust the organisations that we provide our information to. They have to trust us in return. Without trust, we cannot move the social agenda forward. We cannot use the technology, we cannot use the transparency to effect. So trust is incredibly important, and without that trust, we won't get that on. Now, the great advocate of this sort of collaborative economy that we're talking about, of crowdsourcing, is Rachel Botsman, whose collaborative consumption YouTube talks and TED talks have become legendary, and there's an entire industry built around this. She sees things like eBay and Airbnb and Zipcar as clear indications that we have made a step forward in our ability to trust total strangers, driven by technology and driven by transparency. We can see that the eBay purchaser or the eBay vendor, we can see their performance, we can see their rankings, we can see what people think of them. We have a technology platform that puts us in touch with them, and so we've got this trust that comes out of the back of it. And these are all really important parts in building this social pillar, because without those various different components, nothing will happen. So what is social value? We've got to agree a language. Agreeing a language is a sign of maturity. When we're all running around talking about different things, it's because we're searching through the darkness, trying to find the answers. So social value is about agreeing a language, and I think there's the language that we're trying to agree today, the language that is being tried to agree through government, through the NGO community, in civil society and in business, is an indication of the fact that we've got some real maturity taking place. So we're trying to agree some language. Can we advance the slide? Okay. We're trying to understand the complexity. Social is really complicated. I mean, economics is quite straightforward. It's money and it flows through the system. Now, if there's any economists in the room or watching online, I apologise. But it is relatively straightforward compared to some of the social pieces. We understand this. It's a mature existence, and the environment stuff, again, is quite sort of well understood. We're now trying to understand complexity, and when you bring these things together, agree a language, understand complexity, you start to understand why the social pillar is beginning to develop. We're beginning to simplify our offerings. Social used to be really complicated. There were lots of ifs and buts, ands, however, but, ooh. No, now it's very simple. We're trying to improve things. We're trying to make a difference. We're picking on our particular area of activity. It may be skills, it may be apprentices, it may be education, it may be local purchasing, it may be a whole variety of different things, but we've got a very simplified offering. And again, another indication of that this pillar is becoming to come mature. And we're beginning to establish some common standards. And I think if social value and the Social Value Act has a 2.0, then it is going to be about agreeing some common standards and some common metrics and some common measures. And that's that search for common standards which gives me huge hope that we're actually sitting on the edge of something that's really quite exciting. The excitement really is, what is it? It's a clicker. It's the value that we add by the choices we make. The Landmark Difference Report, which I was very delighted to be part of, was about the choices we make. Landmark, when it was established, made a decision that it was always going to be buying from the local supplier, because if you live in a rural community and you work in a rural location, your only supplier is the local supplier. It's no good having a framework agreement with a supplier with a call centre 400 miles away. They cannot respond in the time that was needed to deliver the service to the customer. We made a choice which created value. And it was a very positive decision. It wasn't a decision that we understood at the time. We made that decision well over 10 years ago, well before the Social Value Act was ever going to be, was drafted, was even thought about. We made a decision to buy locally because we didn't have a choice. But we've stuck with that decision so far, and it's been very positive. So the value that we create is in the choices that we make. And I think we're all very familiar with that, and we've heard it from other people. Measurement is a really important part of this. I'm not an engineer. If there's some engineers out there, you'll recognise this. It's a very detailed measuring device. And we've got to find the detail in social value and in social capital. We've got a simplified offering, but we have to find some detail and we have to be accurate about it. And that's one of the things that we learned from our report, was that we found it very hard to be accurate. The social GVA, the social return on investment, is a very hard thing to calculate. We don't know where it is. Oh, that's convenient, isn't it? Almost like I planned it. This is very much Landmark language. It's outside the wire. It was there. I'm sure I saw it. It's there. Somebody want to advance that slide for me? There we go. It's outside the wire. And for all of us, it's outside the wire. We often talk about it's outside the wire. It's life outside the wire. It's life outside the constraints of our business. We live in this weird world where we actually have a wire around our estate in many cases, so it's very physical for us. It's very tangible. But for many people, it's not. It's their business. It's their social enterprise. It's their civil society organisation. Life doesn't really exist out it, and we can't control it and we can't understand it. So we have to find a way to breach that wire. We have to find a way to reach through it and understand what's going on, because most of the impact that we have is outside the wire. So what do we measure when we reach through the wire? Is it input or is it impact? Now, input is the easy stuff. Input is the number of people we employ, the number of apprentices we employ, the progression that they make. That's relatively straightforward. It's not particularly complicated, it's not particularly involved, and we can do it, and we can do it today. But in actual fact, we do need to move to a world where we're looking at impact. We need to understand where those impacts are, and we have to come up with ways of tracking those impacts over time. Tim told us earlier that time is quite an important part in decision making. We've been driven quite often by very short-term performance indicators. We need to come up with long-term performance indicators and long-term ways of tracking this. And it's our ability to use things like technology and transparency and trust that is going to enable us to track people over time, track change over time, track impact over time. If I go in and help in my local school in the village that I live in Wiltshire, and it sees an uptick in attainment from some of the children in that, how does that then play through over the next decade to sustain that community? Because they get jobs in the locality, they might come back to the locality, their family may very well stay together, they will use the local sports facilities, they will use the local shops, they'll drink in the local pubs, they'll buy tobacco from the local tobacconist. Whatever it is they're going to do, they'll do it locally. And how do we track that through? So if we actually improve the educational attainment in a local school, how do we move that forward beyond? And that's very hard to do. And one of the things that I think we're going to have to start talking to people about is using open source data about people. We've seen many of you will have smartphones. Many of you will have smartphones because you're watching this streamed. Therefore, that's the sort of thing that you would do. Many of you will have smartphones. Many of you will have smartphones that will tell you about when the next train is turning up, when the next bus is turning up, when the next taxi is available. That uses open source data. That's massive amounts of data that's been made available to lots of people, and anybody who wants to come along and use that data to drive an app can. Now, if we can access that sort of information about progression and people and communities, then we can begin to understand the social impact that we are having. In order to be able to use information about people, we have to be trusted. Trust is really, really important in this. I'm trusting the clicker, by the way. Oh. Yes. My trust was not misplaced. Okay, transparency. So we can see it. We can see the impact that we're having. We can see the changes that we're making. Transparency enables us to do that. People are prepared to provide data for free, make it available and talk about it. So transparency is one of the T's that we can make forward. Technology, we can track it with relatively simple tools. Decoded, an interesting organisation that will teach you to code in a weekend. They'll teach a 12-year-old to code in a weekend. Might take more than a weekend for me, but they'll teach a 12-year-old to code in a weekend. If you can code, you can write an app. If you can write an app, you can access open source data. You can start to track things. So we have the ability, we have the tools out there to not only see this information, but we can also track it by using technology. And I find it quite odd that we're talking about using technology in a social environment, but it is probably the way it's going to go. And trust, we are allowed to do it. If we're not allowed to do it, then we can't even start. So that trust that is built, that is not lost, and we've seen lots of slides about people who've lost trust, will enable us to keep it going forward. I've now got an amber light, which means I get to talk about everybody else who stood on the stage has had a magazine in their hand, and I thought I'd better bring one with me too. This is yesterday's FT. The FT Business Education Supplement. In here it talks about the rise of social entrepreneurship, and I think something just to leave you with as a thought before the light goes red. It says in here that if you did a Google search a decade ago and you put social entrepreneurship in, you'd probably get a few thousand responses, a few thousand search answers against social entrepreneurship. Today, if you do it, it's 200 million. Now, that might just be that Google's better at searching for this stuff, but it might actually be there's a lot more out there. So it's on the rise. The time is now. If we keep our eye on the 3 T's, I think we've got a happy future ahead. Thank you very much.